Welcome back, everybody, to the School Leadership Show. This is Mike Dowdy, and with me, as always, is my infamous co-host, Jen David Lang. Hi,
How'd you
Jen.
get infamous of all of the
I don't
adjectives?
know. It seemed to just feel right. So, Jen, exciting news. I'm looking at our stats right now, and this podcast, since it started in 2015, is up to, as of this recording, 263,384 downloads. So that's not terrible. That's
No,
pretty good.
over a 250,000. Can't argue with
So
that. That's
here we
amazing.
go.
All right.
So we have some very special guests with us today. We have Jane Kesey and Ann Holm, and we're going to talk about their most recent book. So if you could, ladies, maybe introduce yourselves a little bit, and then we'll get into it. Jane, go ahead.
Well, Ann and I are nodding at each other. I'm been working with educators almost exclusively since 1998, but I have a background in, I think it's kind of funny because I have a English undergraduate degree and then an MBA in finance, so I can coach K-12 all content areas. I have street cred with secondary math teachers, but I also do a lot of leadership development and team building. All of it around a certain set of tools that feed into what Ann and I've done together.
Very cool.
Yeah. So my background's quite a bit different than Jane's, but it actually really helped us create a nice book here because we come at things from different angles. My background is 25 years of working with brain injured people. So I learned a little bit about what helps bandwidth and what doesn't, kind of in the trenches. And then 13 years ago, I stepped out of that role. I was a speech pathologist in that role and stepped into coaching instead. And Jane and I have collaborated on many, many different projects, but this has been the most satisfying by far. And so we're really happy to share all that today.
Well, we're excited to get into it. First of all, Ann, where's this podcast find you?
Minnesota.
Excellent. Jane, where are you?
Also in Minnesota. We live at opposite corners of the Minneapolis-St. Paul area.
So this is where I resist the temptation to say, after the podcast, can we have coffee and bars? I'm sorry. I couldn't resist. Okay. So Jane and what's that? Say it.
After the hot dish.
The hot dish. Yes. Oh, I love it. So yes, Jen and I are in New York, but in very different parts. So Jen's in Brooklyn. I'm up here in Albany. So your book, Educator Bandwidth: How to Reclaim Your Energy, Passion, and Time. So that's what we're talking about today. So maybe Jane or Ann, makes sense to start with you about bandwidth. Like, why bandwidth? What is bandwidth? What's it about? What's it doing in this context?
Okay. So when we were talking about bandwidth, and I'll turn it over to Jane here shortly, because this kind of started with a pretty good story of a client that we were working with together. But basically, there are things that we can do to enhance our focus, our concentration, our brain energy, and things that we do that drain it. And so for many years, as Jane and I have worked together, we've always kind of had that concept boiling in the background about the brain, what's actually going on with the brain here, and why is it, for instance, that certain things aren't getting done, or people are losing focus, or people are burnt out, et cetera. So this started with a really great story with a project that we were working on together. So Jane, why don't you tell that story?
Sure. It was our fourth time being invited as external coaches to work with the leadership development program in a big education organization. And I was doing the opening keynote at their first 3-day gathering, the weekend intensive training. And the audience for that was going to include all the presidents of the organization and people from the board and the candidates and their sponsors and their bosses. And in this fourth go round, it was the first time where our the clients that Ann and I were actively coaching were canceling meetings, not doing their assessments, apologizing up the wazoo, saying, I'm just so busy, I can't get to it. And not only them, but their sponsors, their bosses. And I said to Ann, you know what? I mean, they don't know that how they're working isn't working. There's a change in what's going on there. And, I'm doing this keynote. Why don't we give them a quiz on, do they know how their brains work and what fuels their brain and what drains their energy? So I literally came up with a dozen questions on the back of a napkin, and Ann helped me refine them. And so we asked 15, and people just gave themselves a 0, like never, 2 or a 4. So a total score of 60, and people scored as low as 10. There was laughter in the room as I just gave it orally, as part of the talk, and people saying, in what universe can we do that? And groans. And more important, over the next 3 days, we learned later that we accidentally hijacked the whole weekend, that people talked about nothing but we've got to get our bandwidth up. This isn't working, which was our goal. We just didn't know it was going to be quite so impactful. But then they reached out to us with, we've got to fix something. We've got to do things. And so that was the start of this. And then I tried it with another organization, and 60% of the staff scored below what we thought was a safe level of what we call brain energy. Because you've got, your prefrontal cortex is this hungry piece of your brain, and you use it to make good decisions, to exercise willpower for whatever it is you need to go do. It's also where you take care of your emotional regulation. So if you use that bandwidth up for one of those functions, you don't have it for another. And remember, this was all going on in 2015. We being who we are, we tried keynoting it on it to one of our organizations, got a bunch more people to take the survey. One of our buddies, dear Greg Husko at Eastern Michigan University, said, you've got data, can I analyze it? So suddenly we had a valid survey, way more powerful than those 15 questions on the back of a napkin. And then in 2020, we were asked about perhaps writing a book. And this was in January, before any of us knew the world was about to change. So we signed the contract, and things just got more relevant as we worked with how we really wanted to focus it and shape it for what educators need.
I think that's a really good point too, Jane, that it was done well before the pandemic, some of the stuff we were watching. And that's what we like to share with people, that this isn't a pandemic book. The pandemic was another factor in the current state, but it's been going on for quite a while.
And in our field in education, people have always talked about burnout and bandwidth even before the pandemic. I mean, levels are seemingly higher now, but this has always been an issue. So yes, I was intrigued. So in your book, that is the first thing you provide is a link so that anybody can take this survey. So is that something you encourage people to do?
We do.
Absolutely.
It's a piece where we want people to take it with what we call blameless discernment. I'm going to let Ann just give a little taste of what that is, because it's one of our main focus when we work with a group.
So when we're talking about blameless discernment, we're looking at just taking a step back, almost as if you were a fascinated anthropologist, and just looking at the state of affairs. So you don't want to fall into saying, this is the condition I see, and that's because of this, or you start judging or, zigging and zagging over it. We're really just looking at getting a lay of the land. So if you get a lay of the land, you know which areas you can choose to work on. So when people take that survey, we're not worried about what kind of a score you get. We're really more looking at what's your current lay of the land, what's important to you, et cetera. So I think that it's no diagnosis of any sort, but it's definitely a lay of the land survey for people to take their first step towards improving their bandwidth.
And I really like this idea, the blameless discernment. What I like about your book is the nuance, right? So we definitely saw during the pandemic that our school leaders were worried about staff and teachers, and we're trying to do things like, throw meditation into the staff room, or that, or healthy snacks. But I think what I really got out of your book was that you described these three areas that affect your bandwidth score, right? Yourself, others, and circumstances, right? So if I'm not doing well, right, I can't just say, oh, it's my fault, I'm not getting up and going to the gym before work. There are other things. There's myself, there's what the leaders in the organization are doing, and then there are the circumstances that we're in. And I did find that a very healthy way, not just to understand what's going on, but to find a path out from that.
Yeah, and that helps to take sort of defensiveness out of the equation too, because, if things aren't going well for us, we want to be able to take a real look at it without putting ourselves in a position where we are blaming something, blaming ourselves, blaming circumstances, or blaming other people. We really just want to look at it with as little emphasis on blame and with more just evaluate it. Let's see what we got. Let's see what we can change, what we can work on together.
So that's the perfect segue. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jane.
I was just going to say, when we were first using it back in 2015, the leaders would say to us, well, we can't control what people eat or whether they, get their workouts in, or, their anxiety at home or whatever. And the people on the ground would say, well, we can't control, if we're forced into meetings that warp how we want to use our time, we don't have control over that. And so this idea of blameless discernment is, what am I responsible for? What is the organization, whether it's a formal policy or norms that have developed or things that have just come to be business as usual that no one consciously thought about. And then there's circumstances. The pandemic's obviously a big one, but it could be, the easiest example is, right before winter break, there's a certain tension in a school building as students are excited and everything else. And that changes how we have to protect our bandwidth. So self, other, and, the circumstances all play in, and we want to get that right to know where to put our energy into making sure we have enough bandwidth.
So let's get into that. So let's say somebody takes the survey and they figure out where they are, and what's next?
Well, first of all, don't try and change everything at once, or you'll use up your bandwidth trying to track all the different changes you're trying to make in your life.
Yeah. Taking a look at it and looking at the areas that stand out to you as an individual, what you see as the big drainers of your own particular bandwidth. So, for instance, a real easy example would be to consider the role of sleep. So one of the sections talks about self-care, and we could look at sleep and we could say, okay, maybe I do stay up and watch Netflix till 11 o'clock because we think that's the best way to reduce stress, for instance. And so you go to bed 11 or 12 and you're getting up at 6. And so you're very tired every time you go to school, and all of that. So you look at that and you say, okay, sleep is something where I'm scoring pretty low. Is that something that I'm willing to change? There's the one thing I have to say about this book that's very important is that there are no lectures in this book. There are no you shoulds. It's more about take a look at this and really be honest with yourself. Is this a factor in what's draining your particular bandwidth, and what are you willing to do about it? But we cover a whole range of topics. It's not just self-care. It might be trying to operate with two priorities at the same time. You're trying to maybe do a lesson plan and help your kids with their homework, and you're going back and forth and you're back and forth and you're doing this split attention thing. That's a big bandwidth driver, drainer as well. So you just get an opportunity. Let's just take a look at this and see where that low-hanging fruit is, or what you're willing to change or think you can change.
To help our listeners who maybe have not yet read Educator Bandwidth, I just want to point out that Jane and Anne have organized it into sort of 6 areas of the survey. And so when Anne brought up sleep, she's talking about the chapter on fueling your brain. And each of the chapters have specific suggestions for what individuals can do, but also what leaders can do. And since our podcast, the School Leadership Show, is mostly with school leaders, it sort of goes back to what Jane said about, like, I'm a leader. I can't make somebody, eat more healthily. But there is this section on what, leaders can do. And I really appreciated some of your ideas, like, holding walking meetings when you have your one-on-one meetings with staff, right? Or giving your staff access to and encouraging them to use the athletic facilities on your campus, right? Allowing or encouraging healthy food options, maybe in your vending machines or whatever you have. And this is a great one, share the research about napping and allow staff to nap. Say it's okay, it's the norm. Maybe you as a leader could take a nap as a model. But that's the section on fueling your brain and certain suggestions for how you might address that. I don't know if you have another of the 6 areas that you want to focus on next.
Well, just one comment on the 6 areas. We expanded from those 15 original questions to 32, doing a deeper dive into brain research. And then our research buddy did factor analysis. And so the items actually correlate. It wasn't Anne and me saying what's important. It was, the way factor analysis figures out how do these questions best group, what correlates with what. And so that's where the 6 groupings come from. One of the ones besides the fueling, where we don't tell you what diet to go on or how many hours of sleep you need. We're pointing to the research on the most effective strategies that are out there. There's an actual day in January that's called Quitter's Day, when everybody quits their New Year's resolutions. And we're trying to help you avoid that syndrome by actually looking at the strategies that'll work. Like only doing one thing at a time is one of the big research-based things on changing habits. But I think when we have a group together, one of the other ones we love to focus on is focus. People used to sit down with very thick books and enjoy them, and I think we've all seen that our own attention spans, let alone that of our students, have diminished, that we constantly interrupt ourselves. We let our devices interrupt ourselves. We take it for granted that deep focus isn't possible. We try and number one, there is no such thing as multitasking. There is only task switching. The only thing you can do simultaneously is something like washing dishes or walking, where they're automatic, they're muscle memory. Then you can also engage in something else, or music in the background that doesn't distract you can actually help you focus. We make that comment in the book, but we have a couple exercises where we have people try and multitask, and they see that their productivity goes down by about, is it 60%, Anne?
Twice as long, 50% more errors.
Yeah.
So it's
and
not only is it longer, it's more error ridden.
And that doesn't even count the toll that it takes on you emotionally when you get distracted from something you're working on, and how viscerally angry you can get, and then the time it takes to get back on task.
Which is 24 minutes, 17 seconds, according to a researcher out of California. Takes a long time to get into that flow, and then you get distracted. And one of the things that Jane and I give away when we do workshops is we have little door hangers that say, do not disturb. It takes the brain 25 minutes to get back on track. And so you can hang it out on your door when you're working. And then you flip it on the other side. Okay to interrupt. I'm done focusing. So we give those away, because remember the old days. I mean, the boss kept you from the person trying to enter the room, but we keep ourselves open to everything all the time. And so we're constantly being interrupted. So, thinking of strategies to recapture that is really, really important. Task switching takes an enormous amount of prefrontal cortex energy.
And I love, it's a great example of the different layers, right? The self, others, and circumstances, right? So you put the sign on your door, right, to try to control the environment, the circumstances. But then if you're checking your phone for, you know, your email or social media every 5 seconds, then that's on you, right? So there's part that's you, and part of it is the environment. Part of it is, like, you know, the norms, right? Is it the norm in your school that anybody can bust into the principal's office at any time? Or do you have certain office hours or times that you speak with teachers or parents? So it's really that combination of self, others, and the environment. And so if you can understand that all of those things come together to lead to the problem, that's also your ticket for your way out.
You
You know,
And by the way, and I love that example that you just gave, and I think the key part in that, and because bringing back that blameless discernment, which is the idea that if indeed, you know, people are interrupting you, that you're saying, okay, this is kind of what's going on, and just put the do not disturb sign there, and then don't scold yourself for not, or for looking at your phone. Think, okay, now that appears to be a distraction. What's the best way to handle that? Because we do spend a lot of time beating ourselves up, rather than thinking, I wonder how I can change that.
so we have some key strategies, and one of them is cognitive steps. The idea of how many steps can you put between yourself and an undesirable behavior, or how many can you remove for a desirable behavior? So an example of that is having your apple ready for your afternoon snack rather than having to go get a candy bar. And to remove, we have clients, you know, if your cell phone's on your desk, you're using up bandwidth not to check it, even if you don't check it. So you want to put as many cognitive steps as you need. Do you need to put it in a drawer? Do you need to put it in the next room? And had a client who needed to take out the battery and put it in a box. And so you've also got a norm in your organization that cell phones or emails or texting or whatever your communication is not meant to be answered immediately. And I love it when I get to work with the leaders first, so that they understand that no one feels empowered to do these things unless they're modeling it. And that's a research statement. Also, that the number one predictor of individual bandwidth is an outcome question on where the individuals agree with the idea that their learning community supports efficiency, you know, creates an environment where they can be efficient. And then we work with the leaders on what simple things can you change, can you norm, can you make available so that people can, in this case, focus. In one district, they put together a standard email response that all parents would get from every teacher, that just had the policy on, to put it in the vernacular, we're teaching your children we can't answer the phone all the time, you know, but making that very polite and indicating if it's an emergency, here's the number to call at the school. Otherwise, I'll get back to you in a certain amount of time. And so before the teachers even took the bandwidth survey, they knew that the leadership had taken that step, and a couple others very much committed to changing the organization's norms, which made the teachers feel that it was worth making the effort on their own part.
And that's a huge one. My husband works in a school, and he says the amount of email that has skyrocketed since the pandemic. That's a great one. But I want to get back. So something that Jane pointed out, and something else that I love about this book, is that they're not just telling you, you know, hey, put on a do not disturb sign, you know, hey, don't multitask, hey, eat healthily. But I think what you all do so well is there's a whole section in understanding these are habits that have to be developed. Mike and I love talking about, you know, James Clear's Atomic Habits and Charles Duhigg, The Power of Habits. And you have a section on how do you develop these as habits? Because there's that knowing doing gap, right? I know the Snickers bar isn't the best for me for lunch, right? I know that it's not great to check my social media 10 times in a few minutes, but it's those ideas like you shared, Jane, and that are in the book as well, for how do you make undesirable habits harder, desirable habits easier? How do you focus on one habit at a time? How do you focus on the positive aspect? So just so listeners know, there's a great section on habits. They're not just, like you said, preaching, but also helping you with the how. How do you get that bandwidth back? Do we want to hit one more area, or Mike?
Well, I was just going to say how important it is to have the conversations around norms, because if it's tough to meet an expectation if you don't know what it is. And you know, if somebody new comes into your organization and they just have to kind of bump around into stuff until they figure out, you know, the way we do things around here, you know. But I think having that conversation around all these things, like you said, if the leader basically gives permission for, you know, us to feel this way and to behave this way, then, you know, the chances of success are much, much greater. So yeah, is there a final one you'd like to tackle?
Well, you know, one of the things that was coming back to in my mind is as we were putting the book together, having conversations with teachers and other individuals who are working sort of, you know, working in schools. And one of the things that came up in one of conversations I was having was generational things, like younger teachers who grew up with phones and texting and things like that, maybe giving out their text or their cell phone number for a text without thinking to themselves that could lead to people texting them at all hours of the night, things like that. So when Jane and I were doing this work, we talked to a lot of teachers and said, you know, what are you noticing? And we tried to add a few of those things in the book as well, just to, you know, that it wasn't just coming from us, but with things that other people were noticing as well.
Yeah, the generational differences are fascinating. I've been thinking more and more about this as I approach the asymptote that is retirement. And, you know, looking at the folks that we're hiring and bringing on and their children. Like, I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, they're not children, they're young adults, but still, you know, I'm just curious, is there anything else that has sort of emerged in that vein that has been surprising to you or noteworthy?
You know,
well,
a lot of it is in, I was just saying, you know, a lot of, if you just read the chapter on balancing priorities with blameless discernment and think about what each generation really values. I think, you know, that you never balance your work responsibilities and your personal life once and for all. It just, things happen, and it's not just pandemics. It can be a new baby or training for a marathon, something good, or heaven only knows, a catastrophic illness in your family can cause people to need to rebalance. Even, you know, as and there's more of there's different things that happen at different stages in our lives. But I think as some of the younger generations watched, Mike, we're probably in about the same category. You know, that they're looking at us saying, did they really do what they should have done 20, 30, 40 years ago? And so they're looking at balancing things a little differently, perhaps. And just thinking about that, how do I be my present self is part of what came up in the research on balancing priorities. You know, if you're at the soccer field or with your grandchildren, whichever, you know, end you are on the spectrum, are you actually there? Are you worried about work? Are you, you know, are you one of those parents that's, you know, still in work uniform and talking on the cell rather than paying attention to the child? And therefore, why are you there at all? And I'm not trying to pass judgment. This is the blameless discernment part on where should I be? How do I do this? If I choose to be here, what's my priority? Because otherwise you're draining your bandwidth or the bandwidth of those around you, or your child's bandwidth, or your spouse's or significant other's bandwidth. So really looking at, you know, that whole piece of, are these signs in my life showing that I have the priorities in balance that I want to have, is that whole chapter.
And something
I love
that interesting about this generational difference, you know, so in that chapter where you talk about priorities, and one of the things you suggest for leaders, and it, you know, it comes to this generational divide, right? If the leader is of a certain generation and the teachers are of a younger generation, you said, make sure you have a firm grasp on teachers' reality. Like, what are they dealing with, right? When was the last time you taught? What does your day look like post-pandemic? You've never been a teacher in a post-pandemic school, right? So I was just reading a book today, I want to say it was a Jim Knight book, that said, consider shadowing a teacher, where we've talked about, you know, shadowing students, But why not? If you're of a certain generation, shadow that 26-year-old teacher and see what their day is like so that you can begin to set some norms and model and understand what are the bandwidth issues they're dealing with.
Jen, I'm glad you said that, because I've been thinking about that a lot recently, and I've heard it from different people in different contexts. I think there's nothing as disempowering as feeling like the people who are in charge have no idea what you do. And I've heard that in a number of contexts and thought, well, you're right. I don't necessarily know what a technician in the field does every day, all day. I probably should, so it's a great point.
And I do want to tip our background. Anne's eldest daughter is a secondary teacher, and one of her nieces whom she interacts with all the time. My son was a school librarian and also ran after school programs for at-risk students when he lived in a different town. They are not the only educators who informed us. We cast our nets much wider. We went into schools and sat down, had them take the survey, talked with them, ran with seminars to build the vignettes in the book. But we were very aware of the pressures of not when we were raising children, but as our children raised children and their friends. And we're very anxious to get stories from the people around them as well.
Mm-hmm.
So the book is Educator Bandwidth: How to Reclaim Your Energy, Passion, and Time by Jane Kesey and Anne Holm. Ladies, this was fantastic. I feel like we could talk all afternoon, but I want to be sensitive to your time, and I certainly appreciate your time. Where can folks go to learn more about your work?
ASCD has
go ahead.
ASCD has generously, made the survey available to anyone who wants to take it. And with the survey, you get, that you have access to a handout that talks about your score and what it might feel like to have that score and some basic understanding. So that's the number one place. If anyone's coming to ASCD, we'll be there.
Well, also, by the way, keep your eyeballs on ASCD because they're actually putting together a course based on this work as well. So they've just did some initial work with that. So there's actually going to be an online course provided by ASCD.
Oh, that's
also
great. So I will, I'll make sure I put the link to the survey in the show notes, and there's probably a book page or an author page at ASCD.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll put that one in there too, so folks have access to it. So thank you so much, Jen. Any parting words?
No, just look out for the book. I think this is where we are. Unfortunately, right now, there's a lot of leaders and teachers and other educators talking about bandwidth. So you can pick up some really concrete strategies. So take a look at the book.
All right.
Thank you
thank
so
you.
much.
Stay warm in Minnesota.
We're fine. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care. Bye, Anne.
Bye-bye.
Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you, Jane.
Thank you. Thanks for a great interview.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the School Leadership Show, a podcast for aspiring and practicing school leaders. Send your comments, questions, and show ideas to me, Mike, at schoolleadershipshow.com. And please consider rating the podcast in iTunes and leaving a comment. And definitely pass the show along to your colleagues.